Good evening, good evening, good evening, folks. Welcome to another episode of Spilling Tea. I'm your host, Tiffany Daniels. We are going back to that horrible world known as the JRC, but first, disclaimers. If you're not familiar with the Stop the Shocks campaign or the campaign against the troubled teen industry, pertinent links are right there in the description box, including the article written by Neuroclastic, a small non-for-profit started by autistic for autistics. They interviewed over 800 ABA professionals in regards to the JRC's so-called behavior modification plan, and by doing so got so deep under the JRC's skin that they threatened them with a defamation lawsuit if they did not remove it from their website. Now, obviously, if a place like JRC with unlimited resources got their heckles up so much due to that particular article, something's in there they don't want you to know. So please read it and share it. We also got linked in their Neuroclastics GoFundMe in case the JRC sees through with their threat, because unlike the JRC, us poor advocates do not have access to unlimited resources. Trigger warnings. When we discuss places like the Judge Rotenberg Educational Center or Agape Boarding School for Boys, you're going to hear vivid descriptions of and catch clips or surveillance footage of people with mental health issues and disabled people being tortured and abused. If you do got young children present, please utilize your headphones. Trigger warning number 2. We do have this channel marked is not for kids for a reason. We do use profanity and speak on dark subjects. If your child's 16 and younger and they're watching this, very obviously, parental supervision is advised. We're pulling on to the next sentence, and it looks like we've got a twofer. That's why, unlike the other videos we've done, we've had to take it apart sentence by sentence. Because when they try to a character assassinate, they try to add a whole lot of information that is not relevant and none of the information that actually is relevant to the subject at hand. So, bad character assassination attempts, bad victim blaming, and blaming everybody else but the poor martyred JRC. I don't even have energy to play the world's smallest violin for them, I really don't. Okay. The district tried to use to find an alternative program for EL, but only Melmark in Pennsylvania, a well-respected residential treatment program, accepted EL in 2013. Shortly after his admission to Melmark, EL began to regress. His severe self-injury and aggression increased to the point that he was regularly violent and dangerous self-abusive. He stopped eating or showering regularly. He began engaging in ritualistic behavior and became withdrawn, rarely speaking to family or staff. I read that whole thing because we're going to bust it up for you. Okay? Let's start with number 1. The district sought to get him into an adult services residential program because EL was now the age of an adult. And just like everybody else within that age range, he was going through the regular process of being transferred over to adult services. Number 2, the reputation that the JRC has in regards to a school residential program. It's not a good one, folks. They are very much used as a cautionary tale. And EL is not the first one to age out of their program and have difficulty finding other programs that's appropriate to their age range. There's a reason for that. The JRC won't tell you. And they certainly will tell you that all the information I'm about to make you aware of is unfair, misinformation, that I'm wrong, or obviously I'm just a disabled autistic and I just don't know that what's good for me. Whatever, JRC, pick a number. I've heard it all before. It hasn't stopped me yet. And I'm 40. So, good fucking luck with that. So, let's start with the obvious. The reason why they wanted to move him into another program was because he was in the age range where he was aging out of the JRC program. There is no suspect motives here. This wasn't a program being unfair. It wasn't the District of Columbia picking on the poor, tragic JRC. This is perfectly normal, regular procedure for when you age out of one part of your overall life program. You move on to adult services. This is completely normal. Okay? In spite of what the JRC is trying to tell you here, it's completely normal. It happens every single day. In regards to transition services and why I acted like a consultant, we kind of really spearheaded the transition age services in regards to making that transition as seamless as possible by starting the beginnings as early as possible, in which case I got them to involve multiple facets, including teachers, principals, if they're heading to a group home or assisted living. We've got it pretty good now. It's been a good system for at least a good 10 years since they finally got it mainlined and ironed all the kinks out. It's a normal process. You turn a certain age, you are no longer qualify being a part of a residential school program. You now qualify to go into appropriate adult services. It's normal. It's the same process we all go through. Same process I went through within the same age range from 18 to 19. It's normal. There is nothing bizarre or weird or different in this situation from what everybody else does. Okay? Seriously. Now, in regards to why didn't the other programs take him? Other residential programs, including adult services in particular, have taken in some of the other survivors, like Jennifer Masumba, like Andre McCollins. Kids who come out of that horrific, abusive, torturous school come out of there with some severe psychological damage that is a part of having survived horrific abuse. There are behavior challenges that come from that. There is regression or burnout that comes from that. Remember when I've told you guys, when we come out of abusive environments and that threat of danger is no longer hanging over our heads permanently, that the behaviors we were suppressing out of basically need for survival, because they were never addressed in the first place, they come to fruition and they become worse, more intense, and more dangerous than they had been previously, because now we have psychological damage, PTSD, depression, suicidal ideation that comes along with it. Yeah. Not every single place that does adult services are equipped to be able to deal with all of those issues on top of what they do support. That generally requires very specialized care and supports. Unfortunately, even in the current day, there's not too many places that specialize in that. So no, it does not surprise me that as EL is aging out, he's having such a hard time finding a program to transfer into, considering what we know with the JRC, what we know the survivors suffered and came into their new programs with, and the challenges of dealing with all of that. Okay? It's not surprising at all. Now, keep that regression thing in mind because we're going to be addressing that next. Okay? Now, it's saying the aggression increased, the violence, the self-abusing, the stop sleeping or showering regularly, the more ritualistic behavior, being withdrawn, not willing to speak to anyone. How many of you folks have interacted with someone who just got out of an extremely abusive situation? In particular, someone who has suffered from severe child abuse. Once again, I'm going to use my own instance as a template here. When I was 16 years old, after years and years with my stepbrother of being physically assaulted, sexually assaulted, and emotionally and psychologically abused, and I was ripped out of that situation very suddenly. Guess what? There were repercussions. When that ever hanging thread of fear that I had from a pretty young age until that time of not knowing when he was finally going to finish the job and actually kill me, or how worse the abuse was going to get. When that was removed, I'm talking to you about this as an autistic because there's a distinct way that damage appears with us and is made manifest in that particular type of situation. You want to know what happened after that constant fear, that constant being on edge, hyper alert, hyper aware, on top of masking and hiding things constantly for years without a single break in character if it was possible for me to manage, except going into the real physical meltdowns. Within the first few days is when those issues, those very scary issues, I might add, came to the forefront. Suicide ideation, the self-injurious harm, such as with the hairbrush I've told you all about, spending way too much time looking at the sharp kitchen knives when doing the dishes at my dad's house, throwing myself into situations I knew were bad. I was hyper paranoid. I was over emotionally, physically, psychologically exhausted, burned out. Felt that fear and constant sword over my head, and because of the effect of all that suppressed shit that had built up over several years coming out at once, part of that burnout or regression, we'll use their word here, was I began to rapidly lose skills that I had had since the age of 7. I had to be repotty trained. Again, imagine being 16 years old and how embarrassing that was. And it didn't really help with that self-loathing that I have suffered from for far too many years. I can tell you that. The ability to cook food properly. I had been cooking food meals since I was 10 years old. So about 6 years. I lost the ability to do that. I would forget where I put things. I would put clothes inside out and not even notice it. I did not use deodorant. I did not shave. I did not wear proper undergarments for someone of my age that is endowed like I am. I'm not tooting my own horn here, but considering how I'm endowed, if you're not properly under attired, it is extremely obvious. Okay? I did not bathe properly. I did not do my hygiene properly. I did not brush or take care of my hair properly. Couldn't use the restroom properly. I regressed big time. Big time. I also had a very extreme case of post-traumatic stress disorder. The type where I could and did hallucinate scenarios that I had already lived through and survived. To such an extent that sometimes old bruises would manifest themselves out of nowhere simply by cellular memory. Either that or I was unconsciously recausing them without knowing what I'm doing. Probably the second one is more likely. Okay? So that was going on too. After the flashbacks, not to mention the self-loathing also made me blame myself for everything that happened to me and would also inform me that I deserved it. Like I said, severe psychological damage had been done. I had not been able to deal with it. Now the threat was gone, and all of this was coming to the forefront at once. Okay? What would then happen is that the PTSD would lean into the suicide ideation and the depression, would trigger a full, very physical and violent meltdown, in which I would cause myself a lot of self-injurious behavior and a great deal of collateral damage to whatever room I was in at that point in time. And it took a whole hell of a lot of therapy. It took medication. It took getting a team together at that time to help try to slowly work myself out of burnout. At least to be back where I could be able to function again. Okay? For the most extreme stuff, that took about 2 to 3 years of solid work. But during that time, my meltdowns increased and became increasingly more dangerous. They were triggered ever having a PTSD hallucination. And it was a long, constant, never-ending circle. When you go through something like that, whatever underlying issues you already had due to your diagnosis that were never addressed, that is now paired up with severe psychological damage that has never been dealt with, also for years, and then suddenly you're removed out of that situation, and that threat that caused you to repress and push back all of that for so long, the dam breaks. that is what it looks like when the dam breaks, folks. And yes, it is worse than what came before. That's what happens when you repress these sorts of things for years on end. It could happen to anyone under similar circumstances. Yes, even neurotypicals. Okay? So, no, it does not surprise me that once he was taken in by the Adult Services Residential Program, that his behaviors came out and got worse. It does not surprise me that he regressed and stopped eating, showering, or engaging in regular hygiene. When you're an abuse survivor, that is actually normal. It's a way subconsciously to try to ward people off so that somebody else doesn't cut in and start the abuse all over again. It's not psychologically sound, folks, but when we're going through that, we're not psychologically sound. That's the point. That is the price we have to pay. Okay? You see how adamant I get when the parents say, well, it's good, we signed on to it, and I get mad because they're not paying the price? Because that is the price of surviving horrific years upon years of abuse. That is the psychological toll it takes. We regress, we get worse. And weirdly enough, that is actually a part of the healing process. You can't progress until all the things that you've been repressing, that have been slowly eating you alive, are able to come to the forefront and finally get dealt with. While that's happening, yes, it's going to be worse. The answer to the fact that it's going to be worse is to not to slap them back onto the torture device that caused the issues to get to this point in the first place. The JRC refuses to this day to acknowledge their role into what happens to these kids after they escape their hellhole. You go through severe abuse like I did, like unfortunately every single autistic or otherwise neurodivergent person I have ever spoken to of various ages in my life. There's a price. Guess what? This is the price we have to pay. And no, JRC, the answer is to not slam us back onto the torture device and stick us back into a residential school program that is not equipped to deal with someone who's an adult. And like usual, they blame the regression on, well, he no longer has that life-saving torture device on them, instead of acknowledging the reason why the regression was this bad in the first place was specifically because of their torture tactics. They never accept their role in regards to the psychological damage done or the regression that takes place due to their actions and the fact that they refuse to actually take care of the triggers. they want to live on the punishment model forever. And if it doesn't work and we age out and go to another program, well, obviously it's because they're no longer on our device. If they just would have stayed here and what? And what, JRC? Because I've heard about those kids. They tried to commit suicide multiple times, didn't they? If they didn't manage to escape any other way. That is the truth of these types of situations. What happened here was EL was aging out. The JRC is infamous within this field of work. There has been enough kids who've come out and moved into another adult services to make folks well aware of the additional things that these kids have attached to them coming out of there that a normal kid transferring out of a normal system does not have on them. They're not saying no because the kid's out of control. They're saying no because they're not equipped to deal with the mental health issues now on top of the service needs in order to get these kids the proper help and intensive therapy they're going to need. It's not demonizing. It's not all residential programs are the same. Any more than any treatment program is always going to be the same. Okay? Those regressions, what they're talking about here, are all common from any of us who've survived through abuse, neurotypical or developmentally disabled. Would you tell a kid who just came out of an abusive situation and they are reacting badly to the abuse that they've gone to, that obviously the answer would be to send them back to the abusive parent? No! You would understand that this is the beginning part of getting them the psychological help they're going to need to cope with what they've been through. The JRC is trying to tell you the answer would be to send them back to the abusive parent so that they could control them. If you wouldn't do it to a regular, abused, neurotypical kid after taking them out of the abusive home, then why the hell do people think it's okay to do that to disabled people and that that's somehow the answer? That's that double standard I always tell you all about. If we are not absolutely perfect, their fan-fictionalized idea of what normal neurotypical people are that has no basis or relation to reality. It's to stick them back with the torture because obviously that was working. Instead of realizing what they're seeing is a reaction to getting out and away from the abuse, just as you see it in the behavior of kids who are removed from abusive households. It's the same thing. You should not judge us more harshly for having the same type of problems as neurotypical child abuse survivor peers. And then say, well, obviously they need to go back to being tortured. That is not fair. It's not right. And if you think that way, perhaps you need to sit down in some quiet and think about a few life decisions. And think about how you view disabled kids and how your perceptions on who we are as human beings need to change. We're going to close out for tonight, folks. We don't get very many views on this channel, The few we do tend to get removed from time to time. Please don't forget to hit the like button, hit subscribe. Please don't forget to hit the comments. I do appreciate your time this evening. As always, folks, we here at Spilling Tea hope you have a good one. I'll see you all another time. Bye-bye, everyone.